Moving on to Ethiopia, it's been more than 30 days now that Andargachew Tsige, the opposition leader, was arrested in Yemen while in transit to Eritrea. Now, it's so unfortunate that the Yemen government handed him over to the Ethiopian government. I heard that the Ethiopian government gave Yemen a tobacco company and some land in exchange for the man. Can you believe that? And then his sister tried to visit him, and the next thing, the Ethiopian government deported her out of her country because she wanted to go and see her brother. That makes me wonder who really is the terrorist here. I can't even imagine what his wife and children have been going through for the past more than 30 days. And of course, people are still telling me that this guy is a terrorist because he's a member of Gimbot 7. I decided to look up Gimbot 7 and I found out it's actually an opposition party, largely diasporan, that the Ethiopian government labeled as a terrorist group in 2011. The same way they named the Ogaden National Liberation Front and then the Oromo Liberation Front as terrorist groups. You know, they labeled all these people as terrorist groups. And then I read about the fact that in 2009, these groups were accused of planting bombs and trying to take over from the ruling party. Many of them were arrested at the time and held for more than a month without charges, while making sure that their family members had no idea of their whereabouts. And then they were charged with conspiracy to destroy government institutions, attempted assassination of government officials, and an attempt to incite rebellion in the army. Ultimately, their properties were confiscated. Some of them received death sentences. About 33 of them received life imprisonment. You know, I read about all these things. Anyway, since then, Gimbot 7, Oromo Liberation, ONLF, they've all been considered as terrorist groups by the Ethiopian government. Meanwhile, some other Ethiopians believe that the bombs were actually planted by the government itself in order to implicate these opposition groups. Now, it's very hard for an outsider to know the whole truth, but one thing that baffles me is the fact that this same government has been classifying a lot of journalists as terrorists when they write stories that the government doesn't like. Now, I have a problem with that. I mean, those are my colleagues, and for somebody to be considered a terrorist for doing something like what I do doesn't really add up. Last week, 9 more journalists were charged with terrorism, and that is after they detained them for like 3 months only to announce that they are terrorists. These are bloggers. Anybody can get on the internet to blog. How do you consider somebody like that a terrorist? Which is why it's really hard to understand the way Ethiopian government defines terrorists. And that is not to mention so many other journalists that have been in prison now for years, some of them with chronic diseases. Forget about journalists. People can no longer protest freely in Ethiopia. Is this true or not? I mean, a few weeks ago, I reported about how some women were protesting during a marathon and then they were arrested. It was a peaceful protest. And then remember those who protested when Saudi Arabia deported thousands of Ethiopians. Those people were stopped by the police in Addis Ababa. They stopped their protest. I talked about that as well. And then not long ago, 30 Oromo students were killed in broad daylight during another peaceful protest. Honestly, this government is actually the one terrorizing its own people, and they are calling those who challenge this government terrorists. A truly democratic government would not be afraid of having opposition parties. In a truly democratic country, people should be able to hold peaceful protests without thinking that they may be killed. In a truly democratic country, somebody should be able to blog without wondering if he or she would be arrested. Seriously, it's so hard to buy the idea that anybody that challenges the government is a terrorist. But by the way, what is the UK doing on this matter? I mean, it meant nothing that Andargachew is a UK citizen. I know that the UK is one of the main funders of the TPLF junta, and many Ethiopians believe that the UK is purposely turning blind eyes to what is going on in Ethiopia. I mean, not just with Andargachew. I know of another guy, Ali Adoros, subjected to electrocution, hooding, and beatings during his 18-month imprisonment in Ethiopia. He's also a UK citizen that Ethiopia considered a terrorist, even though he's lived in the UK since he was a child. You know, if the UK withdraws its support, Ethiopia will release all these people. I think there is more to this issue than meets the eye. I'm really hoping that someday Africa will wake up to realize that some Western powers don't really have our best interest in mind. Because if we unite and develop our countries, we would no longer rely on them or their aid. If Africa becomes strong, then there would be competition, and they don't want that. But how can Africa unite and develop its nations when we have the wrong people in power and we are incapable of kicking them out? And then the Western nations who back those people are not willing to switch sides and back the people, because you know, it's not just Ethiopia. There are so many African countries where we have dictators and Western countries are supporting them. I guess that has been the African story though for generations, you know. But you guys know that I don't know anything. Guess what? I'm just keeping it real.